This afternoon, a huge story revealing the closest, most direct connection of Donald Trump so far to hush money payments made to silence porn star Stormy Daniels and 1998 Playboy Playmate of the Year Karen McDougal. Clear indication President Trump and his team have been lying to the American people for years, and that he may, in fact, have also broken federal election laws. The Journal reporting federal prosecutors have evidence of Trump's direct participation in those payments, finding Trump was involved in or briefed on the agreements nearly every step of the way. The Journal also laying out connections we have not heard before, in which, quote, Mr. Trump intervened directly to suppress stories about his alleged sexual encounters with women, according to interviews with 36 people who have direct knowledge of the events or who have been briefed on them, as well as court papers, corporate records, and other documents, unquote. President Trump, of course, infamously said he knew nothing about the payments. That was clearly a lie, according to this story. In one incident newly revealed today, the president allegedly told his now former fixer, Michael Cohen, quote, get it done, after Trump learned of Stormy Daniels' plans to talk publicly about their alleged affair. This was in the fraught, high-stakes era before the presidential election, but after the release of the Access Hollywood tape. President Trump's lawyers have declined to comment on the Wall Street Journal story. Let's go now to CNN's Sarah Murray. Sarah, the president's participation was even laid out by federal prosecutors' charging document of Michael Cohen. They just didn't name Trump.
That's right, Jake. And I think the WSJ story does a sort of a good explanation of how we got to the point where, Michael Cohen was in a courtroom earlier this year implicating President Trump in this payment scheme. And in those charging documents for Michael Cohen, it said that Cohen coordinated with one or more members of the campaign, including through meetings and phone calls, about the fact, nature, and timing of the payments. And then, of course, Cohen went to court and said he made these payments in the direction of a candidate for federal office, which of course was then candidate Trump, now President Trump. The other interesting point in the WSJ story is that there was this draft indictment, an 80-page draft indictment that was never filed against Michael Cohen that also detailed a lot of Trump's involvement in this scheme. But again, that was never filed. Instead, CNN has confirmed that indictment existed, but Michael Cohen got engaged in these plea negotiations, and so the public never saw that 80-page document, Jake.
And Sarah, the Wall Street Journal story also lays out a 2015 meeting in Trump Tower. Candidate Donald Trump meets with media executive David Pecker. He heads the company that includes the National Enquirer.
That's right. And this is sort of a look at where this all began. It's this meeting between Donald Trump and David Pecker. AMI declined to comment on this story. But, in this meeting, Donald Trump essentially says, look, what can you do to help me? And David Pecker apparently replies and says, well, what I can do is I can, make sure that I can silence these women. I can make these stories go away if women start coming out and making these allegations against you. And so this is sort of the beginning, allegedly, of this scheme that now, President Trump has been implicated in, Jake.
All right, Sarah Murray, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Let's talk about it with our legal experts. Bottom line this for me. How worried would you be if you were Donald Trump or his counsel?
Well, it all depends on whether, now that we've got a new acting attorney general, the Southern District of New York is willing to actually do something about this. But there are two aspects of this. One is the contribution aspect, that there's a limit on the amount of money that can be given to a campaign. But Mr. Trump's campaign had to disclose that. And then there's the expenditure side of things. That has to be disclosed as well. And if they communicated with each other to actually influence the campaign, that could be a crime. So we don't know how much information they have. I really think at this point, we've seen so many of these mounting allegations against this president, the Teflon president. It really comes down to the broader, I think, structural constitutional issues of whether there's going to be accountability at any level anymore in our system of government.
And what do you think? I mean, would you worry, were you Donald Trump or his lawyer?
I would have worried the second David Pecker got immunity, because I would have known at that point in time that the prosecution had some incentive to say, we're going to inoculate you essentially at this point in time. Whatever you're going to tell us is of enough interest that we're willing to say we're not going to prosecute for whatever you say. Second point, of course, is the president's going to come back and say, hold on. There was maybe a dual purpose. Remember back when John Edwards ran for president and he had a mistress and there was the issue of the hung jury, and they weren't buying the idea of campaign finance violations then because there was an ulterior motive for trying to keep her silent. Here, the president has a wife, he has businesses, he's going to say that's the reason why he did it, and it's not a campaign finance violation. The biggest problem is David Pecker's own statement of, he asked me, what can you do for my campaign? Not what can you do to help me make Melania happy, happy wife, happy life, or my business is great. That question and the answer and the resulting actions he took would make me very nervous that I would have a direct connection to a campaign finance violation, among many other things, as Kim was talking about.
And Pecker of the National Enquirer, he met with Trump over this payment to McDougal, the former Playboy Playmate of the Year. And he said that he spoke to an election law specialist, decided it wasn't a violation for him to offer her money for whatever it was, columns that never ran, as a way to keep her quiet about her alleged affair.
Yeah, so, I mean, the question is whether it's being offered for purposes of actually helping the campaign. And as Laura mentioned, with respect to John Edwards, I think the defense was that, well, he was actually trying to hide his affair so that he wasn't going to upset his pregnant wife. Here we also have a timing difference, right? So these affairs occurred many years before, and these payments were made very close to the election. So that doesn't go in Mr. Trump's favor. But sure, I think the fact that not only is Mr. Pecker, but Mr. Weisselberg, who was also involved in some of these arrangements or negotiations about how to pay these people off, he also has immunity. He's also talking. I think there's a strong case probably to be made against the president, but then we have these constitutional issues. And
then just to remind people, presidents cannot be indicted. Sitting presidents cannot be indicted, right?
According to a guideline. It's not set in stone. Frankly, guidelines never are supposed to be, but that has seemed to have been the pace up till now about a sitting president. But the word sitting is very important. We already passed the midterm elections, and that could be changed with time. The other thing here to remember is not just Weisselberg, not just Pecker. Michael Cohen also made a statement in open court along with his own guilty plea. He'll be sentenced a few weeks from now at the beginning of December, talking about the president giving him a direct connection and really an order to violate campaign finance law and try to circumvent the accountability factor here. So you've got these adding things. Now, perhaps Michael Cohen was not the most sympathetic or even empathetic witness for people. Maybe he seemed as though it was contrived and had something to lose. He wasn't getting an olive branch from anyone. But that, coupled with Weisselberg, who knows all the finances, coupled with David Pecker, who is the person who had the magazine and the National Enquirer, it's mounting against the president.
We also have the Cohen raid, right? We have the documents that they obtained. I just want to make a point. I think there is some confusion, really, as to whether a president can be indicted. Ken Starr, my former boss in the Whitewater investigation, his team concluded yes, and so did Leon Jaworski's team in connection with the Whitewater investigation, or excuse me, the Watergate investigation.
Watergate, yeah. So just to go back in time until April, just to remind people what President Trump said when asked about these payments to Stormy Daniels made by Michael Cohen. He was on Air Force One, and this is when President Trump, according to all evidence, lied directly to the American people.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
No.
Why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no true allegation?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's an attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael Cohen.
Do you know where he got the money to make that payment?
I don't know. No.
So he claims he did not know about the payment to Stormy Daniels, and he didn't know where Michael Cohen got the money to make that payment. All available evidence is that those are lies. Does it matter legally that he told those lies?
I mean, it matters with respect to his credibility, but he didn't testify under oath, or there wouldn't be any perjury type charge. I mean, I should say, you know, we have this looming concept of impeachment as well, and for purposes of that, something like lying to the American public historically would be something that would be taken into account or could legally be taken into account.
Now, then in August, President Trump eventually relented and admitted he knew of the hush money payments, but only later on, and claiming he didn't know, it didn't come from the campaign. Take a listen.
Did you know about the payments?
Later on, I knew. Later on. But you have to understand, Ainsley, what he did, and they weren't taken out of campaign finance. That's a big thing. That's a much bigger thing. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me.
What do you make of that? Is that accurate? It doesn't matter that they didn't come from the campaign, they came from me.
Well, let's follow the logic here. First, it was his attorney. Then it wasn't his attorney. Then it's a matter of he didn't know about the payments and he knew about the payments. Then he signed on as well to a lawsuit in California saying that actually I want to have a hand in not only Stormy Daniels' case, but Karen McDougal, which wasn't a case any longer. So you have this evolution of his stories combined with the idea, well, now that I'm telling you this issue about it coming from myself and not the campaign, it shouldn't make a difference. Well, then you have the reporting aspects of it. And the reporting aspects of it, he, no matter what, no matter it came from the campaigner himself, had to have reported it. It's not in a single financial disclosure document. It's not in any campaign finance reporting obligations. And the fact that he paid or knew about it after the fact, imagine, if you will, the logical extension of that. All I have to do is not remember long enough until after a campaign and not report long enough. I can circumvent every single campaign finance law. That's never what it was intended to be, and I think he's on the hook.
Hush money payments, significant legally, forget the president for a second, just for anybody out there. Hush money payments, a candidate running for office hides them. That's a serious crime?
Well, the question is with respect to whether it can be considered an in-kind contribution. So if it's actual cash, we understand that. But if it's something of value, and in the timing, as we discussed, would be something of value, presumably. Mr. Trump, at that point, it was close. The Stormy Daniels was close to the Access Hollywood tape coming out. He was concerned about his candidacy, about voting. And so I think the argument would be, sure, that actually was a contribution in that it helped him get elected, potentially get elected. So, yeah, it would be, I think, probably trigger criminal implications under the campaign laws.
Kim Whaley, Laura Coates, thanks so much. Really appreciate your expertise.